The sword. Ripper was a harsh man, to say the least. Gerald would have thought it to himself if he'd had even the smallest of opportunity to do so before Ripper showed his horrendous face, which was covered in scars. He was a bald man, his hands were large and brawny, perfect for wielding a weapon, or a shield. He was a killer, and he had served in the army, as Gerald had, even fighting alongside him at times, though they had not known each other well until, of course, they had. It hadn't been a pleasant experience, as now this experience too would not be so. They threw Gerald onto the floor in front of Ripper. Ripper Borges was his name, and Gerald, as he looked up to him, after showing a look of disgust for the man, gave a sly smile and greeted him accordingly. "Ripper Borges," he said. "Gerald," Ripper almost purred. "Good to see you again." He let his words trail off like that in a cunning, gross sort of way. Gerald could only sigh. The other men filed in behind him, and once seeing the tall figure that was Ripper, looked only to Gerald, who stood from his kneeling position. Ripper was at least a foot taller than he was, and perhaps even more so than some of the other men. In size, a monster he was, Gerald had always thought of the man, and a monster indeed. He wore no shirt, only black pants and black boots, and he had a large piercing between his egregious nostrils. Perhaps he was intimidating to other men, but Gerald noted the scar on Ripper's forearm, where he had cut him years past, and he smiled. Ripper noticed and smiled back. "I suppose you remember that," Gerald grinned. "I do," Ripper nodded. Gerald opened his mouth slightly, closed it, and then gulped. He looked down, but he regained his composure quickly and stared at Ripper. Their eyes locked on one another. "Be on with this, then." "Very well," Ripper replied rather quickly, stepping aside. He gestured with his arm to move forward and step to the side so that Gerald could easily pass. Gerald knew that there would be a catch to such a polite gesture, but only grinned and walked forward. As he did so, Ripper kicked him behind the knee so that he fell to the ground once more, drew his sword, which he had placed neatly in his scabbard, and placed it against Gerald's throat. "Do you wish to die today, Gerald?" Ripper said calmly. "Take it that I do," Gerald said. "Would you commit to it?" Ripper laughed, releasing him. "Get up, you," he called to his guardsmen, of which he had 5, heavily armed, wearing his color, black. "Take them into the holding cells. We will prepare their training routines." "Yes, sir," they called, grabbing hold of Gerald, and without giving him the opportunity to walk, dragged him along as the other men were pushed and prodded with spear, or by spear, to move forward and into the holding cells. And they really were holding cells, with bars and everything else, unfortunately. 2 men per cell. Gerald and the boy, whatever his name was, were placed in a cell together. When they were left alone and the sun had passed from the middle of the sky to the edge, and the day dwindled to twilight as could be seen from the open windows across from the cells, which would cool the room quite a bit overnight and make it difficult to sleep, the boy began to speak. "Gerald," he said. Gerald, laying on his a concrete pad that stood a few inches off of the floor, with no bedding, did not at first reply. "Gerald," the boy said again. "Quiet," Gerald said. "Quiet, boy." A silent moment passed before the boy spoke again. "I'm not a boy," he said. "You are," Gerald said, glancing over slowly at him, "and you'll die a boy." He was gruff and brutal, but he had no intention of watching the boy die. In fact, he meant that he might live, but he knew that he could not make it obvious, not in the fighter's school. That sort of thing would never get him anywhere there, and in fact, it would only do to harm he and the boy, whatever his damn name was. Nonetheless, he was still annoying Gerald. "Gerald," the boy said. Gerald would not look at him. The boy moved around uncomfortably on his pad, sighed hastily, and spoke again. "Gerald," he said, "tell me my odds." "Odds?" Gerald said, glancing again and abruptly looking away. "What odds?" "Funny," the boy almost smirked. "What is?" Gerald said, without glancing. The boy gulped. "So, I'm dead." Gerald smiled. "That's what I said." "I'm a proven warrior," he tried to retort. Gerald looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "Are you now?" "I fought in the Legion." "That doesn't make you a warrior," said Gerald. "It makes you unlucky." "I suppose that's true now," the boy said hesitantly. Gerald nodded. "Don't worry, boy, I won't kill you." "Please don't call me boy," the boy said. Gerald shrugged. "What's your name, then?" The boy raised an eyebrow. "Now you want to know." Gerald looked away once again, crossing his arms over his legs. "Not really." Didn't you want to know?" the boy noted. Gerald laughed but said nothing more. It's Jeffer. Jeffer, Gerald said, amused. What kind of a name is Jeffer, anyway? My mother gave it to me. Gerald Scott, obviously your mother gave you that name. Yeah, the boy said nervously. Gerald grit his teeth. Why are you thinking of your mother, boy? I want to remember her. Gerald nodded, seeming to understand. Before you die. Perhaps, the boy said, still nervous. Gerald stood quickly, walked over abruptly to him, grabbed him by the shoulders, and threw him down onto his pad. He grabbed a hold of the collar of his shirt and whispered to him harshly, Think like that, and you'll die in here. Gerald let go. The boy looked at him bewildered. You'll kill me? They will, Gerald shouted, pointing to the cell through the wall parallel to their bars as he walked over and plopped down onto his pad. He didn't even feel the sting of the concrete pad beneath him as he did. The other men in the other cells, surely they were harsh men. The boy nodded. Oh. There was another silent moment. What do you suggest? The boy said. I suggest you stay quiet, said Gerald rather calmly. What happens if I don't? The boy asked. Gerald shrugged. It's smart to stay quiet. Smart for me or smart for you? Gerald smiled. See, you're a smart boy, so stay quiet. Don't call me boy. Fine, Gerald said as he raised his hands and threw them back onto his lap. Jeffer. Thank you, said Jeffer. Gerald shook his head. Don't thank me, he spat. Yet another silent moment passed. Then what? Fight, said Gerald said. Fight, 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 he spat out rapidly. For what? For what? The boy asked. Gerald looked at him and smiled before looking up towards the ceiling. He shook his head. There is no for, there is no what, not anymore. You just fight. But why? Gerald shook his head. It's not a question worth answering. The boy nodded, seeming to understand, though Gerald doubted that he did. Can I win my freedom? The boy asked. Jeffer asked. If you fight well, perhaps, Gerald lied to him, shrugging. Remember, he touched his head with a finger. You were a legionnaire. What does that mean now? The boy asked. Good question, Gerald said in reply. Do you know? Gerald shook his head. All I know is the sword, and that's all you know now, too. The boy was quiet. Gerald continued. You don't know your friend. Gerald pointed in the cell over. You don't know your mother, he spat. You don't know me. The boy nodded once. Gerald looked at him and nodded back. You know the sword. That is all.